ABCDEFGHIJKLMNOPQRSTUV WX, Y, and Z.
Hey, we got it. Okay.
Good luck.
Hello, everybody. My name is Lat Mackey, and this is Sequence Break, episode 50, and lucky number 50. Adef is the guest today. Adef, how you doing?
I'm doing really well. How are you, Lat?
I am doing great, man. Thanks. This is actually, so as much, Adef and I work on Games Done Quick Hotfix together, but this is like the first time we actually had a chance to like meet one-on-one, so it's kind of weird, but it's great. Thank you so much for doing this. I appreciate it.
Yeah, of course.
Before we get started, I guess, I didn't, man, you know what? There's so much to get to. I'm like, how do I describe everything that Adef does in streaming and speedrunning and everything like that? I guess if somebody asked you, like, what do you do on the Twitches and all that kind of stuff? What would you tell them at this point?
For years I would have said purely I am a speedrunner when it comes to my Twitch career, I guess. Right. But I think of late, I would describe myself more as like a speedrunner, yes, but I hate to use these words, but it really works. A content creator.
Hey, there you go. Yes, perfect.
Because I'm making lots of things these days, so I'm sort of both.
I think that's totally accurate, and I know it's just a little bit almost feels cliche when you say it out loud, but yeah. I think you definitely fit that definition, and we'll get to that all because we got a ton to get to. But let's this is how I like to always start these things. Let's take it way back. When did you start gaming, and what were some of the games that got you into gaming?
So the very first video game I ever played was Pokemon Red on the original Game Boy. It actually taught me how to read.
Really?
Yes. So my mom and my siblings were teaching me how to read with Bob books. I don't know if you're familiar with Bob books.
No.
They're these things from the 80s and the 90s. They're to teach kids how to read, and they're fun little stories. So I was learning to read with those, but concurrently I was playing Game Boy every morning. And I would learn most of my vocabulary from like the first 10 years of my life came from Pokemon. I was like 3 or 4, maybe 4 at the time when I was playing Pokemon Red, and I didn't know you could save.
Oh no.
And so I think this is actually where speedrunning began for me because I would pick up the game, turn it on, play to the first gym, and then my mom would tell me breakfast is ready and I would turn it off. And I was perfectly fine with that. I had no problem just like walking away.
Oh, dude, that is so brutal.
I know. Eventually I found out that you could save the game and then I actually beat it, but
So interesting you mentioned that because I just actually started my first Pokemon game ever, and I was trying to think what. Yeah, so I'm playing Pokemon Crystal. I played a little bit of Pokemon Red about a month or so ago, but people have kept recommending it. So somebody sent me a cart. I have a Game Boy player on the GameCube, so I was able to stream it and everything. And I got to tell you, I don't know why I missed these games. So in the 90s, I was probably like a teenager, and I don't know if that's one of the reasons I missed it, but they're so much fun, and I can understand why so many people, like this is one of those games that like starts to capture you and stuff. When you finally did finish it, did you continue playing it? Did you replay it? Like what's the story after, or were you moving on to the next?
No, I moved on.
Okay.
We had Silver, and so I played Silver after that, and Crystal, the game you're playing, is in my opinion one of the best. So it's a great place to start. It's the best Gen 2 Pokemon game, in my opinion. It's a great place to start.
It has been way more fun than I even thought of, and I just kept wondering, like, why did I miss this as a kid? So I got to ask you, I mean, did you Nintendo, Mega Man, anything like that? Because as you'll see, that's one of the ones on screen right now is Mega Man later on in speedruns. Did you play any of that as a kid?
So the only Mega Man game I played as a kid was Mega Man on Game Boy, because Game Boy was really all I played until I was probably 6, 7, or 8 years old, and we had an N64, and then we eventually got a GameCube by that point. But I only really played Game Boy. And so Mega Man on Game Boy, Dr. Wily's Revenge, is some people will tell you it's bad. Some people will tell you it's good. I love it. That was my introduction to Mega Man. And then I played SMB1 and some other NES games here and there, but we didn't own an NES. And then when I was maybe 12 years old or so, I got introduced to Mega Man 1 on NES, and I played on emulator for years until a friend of mine was selling an NES and I bought one, and the rest is history.
And that was it. You're done. Real quick question about I think it's, do you still have your childhood Game Boy? Oh man.
Oh boy. In a box somewhere, probably in a storage unit, I would guess.
It just seems like that for the people that have been on the podcast, that seems like something that people have actually kept with them. It's like one of those things they didn't, give to a friend or a family or something like that.
Yeah. I know we didn't give it away, and I know we didn't sell it. It definitely exists somewhere where we keep things. But being a student for the last, some odd years, I've been moving around a lot. And so I've had to be very choosy with what I took with me. And Game Boy was not really a priority.
So then when did you, move, or when did, it sounds like Pokemon Red might have been the seeds of a speed run and everything like that. How about like formally, or when did you first see one or experience one that kind of led you down that path?
So I know my first speedrun experience to play, but as far as the first one I ever saw, it's kind of hard to say because it was over a decade now that happened.
Wow.
I am pretty sure that the first speedrun I ever saw was Narcissa playing Wind Waker any %, I think. And it was in the early days when like Giano had the world record and it was over 6 hours.
Oh, wow.
I'm pretty sure that's the first one I watched, but in late 2011, I started playing Mega Man 1. And then in mid 2012, I found speedrunning because I was playing the game a lot and I was like getting better at it. And I thought, well, how quickly are people beating this? And I found the Speed Demos archive, as everyone does. I found SDA, and I believe it was Seth Glass's run on SDA was his 2022 was the first Mega Man 1 run I saw that I was like blown away. And I was like, what is this? I have to do this. And then there were some other runs highlighted on Twitch that I found, and then I just couldn't stop. And for that first year, like mid 2012 until mid 2013, that is all I did. Like all I did was play Mega Man.
Wow. Okay. So there's all these wonderful games coming out, and 3D is blooming, everything. But wow, that's awesome. Okay. So that's you got the bug. That's awesome. What was I'm curious, what's the categories back then at that time? Because one of the things like SDA, from what I've heard from those who have been on the podcast, have just mentioned, there was no category. It was just Mega Man, beat it as fast as you can or whatever. I'm curious if there were categories at the time when you started doing them.
Yeah, no categories in Mega Man at the time. I mean, any % was a word that was used,
okay,
and had been for a long time, but there was really only one Mega Man run. It was just beat the game. We used any % when we migrated to the SRL IRC, to the Speedrun Live's IRC chat for races. We used any %, obviously, and it was used before that, but I think Seth Glass's run was just Mega Man in 2022. On SDA at least. And then it was years later that Mega Man started branching out into more categories.
Right.
Maybe 2013, 2014, we had the introduction of a glitch called the ladder grab. And then we were able to get the magnet beam early. And so a new category was branched off, or rather then arbitrary code execution was found in Mega Man. And that became any %. And so now the competitive category in Mega Man for the last 6 years has been all stages.
All stages. Okay.
And so what you're seeing below on the screen, it was called any % when I played it at SGDQ 2014, but is now called all stages.
Got it. And so at this point, I think it's interesting to bring up the video, because at this point you've been running the game then for a couple of years. Like you've had the experience, you've been spending some time with it.
Yeah, about 2 years at that point.
What is it about Mega Man that kind of hooked you? I think there are so many, especially Mega Man 1, which in my opinion still feels pretty different than 2 and 3, kind of the ones that became more popular.
Yeah, so I love most of the Mega Man games. There's something about tight platforming with like really clean design that I can't get away from. And Mega Man 1 is just, I know the story. I know why I play Mega Man 1. The reason is I started off, in 2010 and 2011 doing Let's Plays and watching Let's Plays like everyone else of that era. And one person that I really looked up to was Nintendo Capri Sun, NCS, who's a pretty prominent Let's Player. And I saw him streaming one day, and he was streaming Mega Man 1. This was maybe on Justin TV. This might not have been Twitch yet.
Oh, wow.
And I messaged him, and I was like, this game looks really cool. We should race it. I'd never played it before. And he was like, sure. And I was like, oh, he responded. Because I was a kid. I was like, whatever. It doesn't, there are no consequences to my actions.
Yeah, why not?
And so I started playing the game, and then we did a race, and I lost. And that race actually can still be viewed on YouTube. You can hear my prepubescent voice just talking to Nintendo Capri Sun about Mega Man 1. After that, we did that race. And then after that, I really had the bug. And that's when I started discovering Speed Demos Archive and everything after I had played the game. And it took me, almost an hour to beat it. And then after that, I was like, well, certainly this can be done faster.
Right.
And so it stuck. I think it's a mix of nostalgia, and also it's the game I've played the longest. And it's one of the only games where I would say, like, I'm genuinely competitive. Like, any speedrun that I pick up, I want to be competitive. But I think Mega Man 1 is one of the only ones where, like, anyone would tell you that I am good at this game, I think.
Well, having not done the speedrun myself, I've only played through the casual experience. There's RNG, there is some pretty big luck things involved. But at the same time, I've noticed people, as they get better at the game, the time does come down. Like, there is this skill thing that happens with it. And I think that's one of the things that makes it compelling. I love watching it. I still watch people run this game today because it's fun to see people's progression in it. It's, you can see it right there as it's happening on screen.
Yeah, the skill curve in Mega Man 1 is really unlike a lot of other games, I think. At the beginning, you feel progression is really slow, which is very different from a lot of speedruns, I would say. Usually at the beginning, you feel like you're picking up speed really quickly.
Right.
But in Mega Man 1, the progression feels slow at the start. At least for me, it was. This was years ago before there were very many resources. But Nadua and I kind of came up in the game at the same time. And we just battled back and forth. We're like, oh, who will get under 24 minutes first? Who will get under 23 minutes first? And that took years. And then once I managed, I told myself I was going to get a 19. And this was when the world record was still in the 19s.
Jeez.
And I really wanted to prove to myself that I could get a 19-minute time. And it took a lot of grinding, but I did it. And once you break the 20-minute barrier, I think that's when the game sort of like unlocks and you start to see the Matrix. Because I, after 19, just started PBing all the time. And you also, by that point, I'd been speedrunning for 6 years. You have better practice mentality. You understand what is required to speedrun more quickly and like what is required for practice. But anyway, I'm on a complete tangent now.
I'm glad you mentioned that because that actually brings some really interesting insight. Because I do see people, once they start bringing those, like they stay with it. You can go on Twitch almost any day of the week, not any day, any time, and see there's a lot of people still actively running this game, and that makes a lot of sense from what you're saying. It clicks with somebody, it clicks with you at that point.
Yeah, I think. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. Please go.
I think ultimately there was. Now we're just. This is like my favorite game. But
yeah,
and not because it's like it is a great game in my opinion. It's not my best game, that I've played. But it's my favorite game just because it holds such a place in my heart, and like unironically. And 2019 was like a really weird year for me. I went through like a nasty breakup, and I didn't have a job, and no. I was in the town where I was going to school for the summer, and I had nothing to do. And I was like, you know what? Screw it. I'm gonna get an 18 in Mega Man 1 this summer, and I had a 1927 when I made that decision.
Yeah.
And everyone had been telling me to get an 18 for a long time, and I always wrote it off as impossible.
Right.
Because 19XX is a really good barrier to hit. That means you are a talented player.
Right.
18XX is like the upper echelon.
That's the next step.
And I was like, there's no way I can get an 18. But I just like buckled down, and I just started telling myself I could do it. I would just wake up and be like, I'll get the 18 soon. And then, after 2 straight months of grinding every single day for like 5 hours a day, I got an 1854, and it is to date, hands down, the gaming achievement I am the most proud of. I'm not sure I'll ever eclipse it, honestly.
Oh, that is so rad. But to actually set a goal and to actually achieve it. It's interesting. The guest right before you actually was Lack Attack, and he's one of the things I've taken away from him that I still do this day is that setting goals thing. And sometimes they're aspirational and other times they're more realistic. But I mean, I think that can be a really powerful thing if you're a speedrunner. It's not for everyone, but definitely for some of us, we react to it, you know?
Yeah, I think speedrunning lends itself to this benchmark mentality where we sort of have like numbers that we're trying to hit. And I sort of stole Lack's spreadsheet a couple of years ago.
Spreadsheet, yes. Same
His
here.
goals spreadsheet. I literally just ripped it and then filled in my own games with my own times. It was already formatted. Why not? It
works perfectly.
Exactly.
I gotta ask about this run here because the GDQ run specifically. So this is right about when I found GDQ was around this time, 14, 15. And it was really well known to me because your dad was in the audience. And
oh, wait, you saw this run? This is so good.
Yes. Yeah, so, and with respect, you look pretty young in the run. So I'm like, wow, this kid is just destroying, you know. How old are you at this time? And what made you think about bringing your dad with you?
So I was 15 in this run. At that point, and for years, I was the youngest person ever to play at a Games Done Quick event. I think Rezifos beat me out with SMW a couple years after that. Dang. But for years, I was the youngest person ever to play. And nowadays, people this young don't play at GDQ. Right. But yeah, I mean, legally, my dad had to be there.
GDQ said it's the rules.
There was GDQ rules. If you were under 16, you had to have a parent or guardian with you. Or it was under 17, I think.
Gotcha.
And so I brought my dad, and I mean, he was happy to go. And this was my first GDQ experience. You know, GDQ was kind of still in its infancy in a way.
Oh, yeah.
You know, compared to today, obviously.
Oh, yeah.
And I just had so much fun. I remember that week so fondly. I made several friends that are literal lifelong friends at that event. Not only at that event, but right after this run. If you look in the back right of the video, you can see Indy and Patty sitting right next to each other.
Oh,
after
awesome.
this run, I go and sit in front of them, and they both introduce themselves to me. They are now two of my best friends. So, like...
Well, I was thinking about this too, and there were some really nice comments on the YouTube channel about this and everything. And what an experience to have as a 15-year-old. You know, I didn't even go to a convention until I was in my 30s. And so like the fact that you get to see all these people who are into the same stuff you're in, you probably get to meet members of the Mega Man community and all that kind of stuff. It just seems like kind of an awesome, unreal experience to have and then play in front of thousands of people, you know.
It was, 15. I mean, truly unreal. And I'm grateful every day that I got to go to that first GDQ and for all the GDQs I've gotten to go to or play at. But it was really, I mean, it changed everything, I think. I already viewed speedrunning as like a hobby I was pretty serious about. But I think after this event, I viewed it more as a pretty central part of my life. And it would not be wrong to say that speedrunning has been one of the only unchanging parts of my life for the last like almost 10 years. Like... I've always been doing this now, so I don't know.
Yeah, no, it's great. I think it's and especially, and that's I think one of at least me personally, it's one of the things I miss so much about having the live events is that these people we're so connected to, we haven't had a chance to like see in real life. It can take a little bit of a toll on you, you know.
The opportunity to just like you see your friend from across the stream room or across the practice room, you just walk up to them like that. That is something that I miss for sure.
Absolutely. Before we get off the Mega Man thing, the one thing the next year, and I don't have the video of it here, but you participated in a race of Mega Man, and every year this kind of seems now like as a staple on GDQ stage, on ESA, on everywhere that does marathons. Mega Man makes such a great race. Mega Man 2, all the Mega Mans you can play, all of the NES, Super, and I'm curious if you have any thoughts on like what makes the Mega Man games such great race games.
There's not a ton of luck in the NES Mega Man games. Like Mega Man 1 specifically, there's only a handful of things that matter these days when it comes to luck. There are sub-pixels, but not for things you would typically go for in a marathon. And the skill ceiling is really high, and it just so happens that there are a lot of really talented players near the same level as each other. And I think all of those things together kind of make it an exciting race game, and it's short. I think great races that can be really close are usually within about 30 to 40 minutes long. Right. And so that helps.
That makes a lot of sense. It's always something, and I've been fortunate now to see a bunch of them live, and they're just always they're always nail biters. Like they can, there's always something. There's back and forth. That's a really, I think you've highlighted a lot of things that's the reason it happens, because of that skill and how much that actually plays into the achievement there at that point. So.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So let's switch gears here a little bit. And here's kind of the reason here's a little bit behind the scenes. I recently, just last year, got a Switch and started playing through Breath of the Wild. And Zelda Ocarina of Time has always been my favorite game. I'm just a diehard Zelda fan. Yeah, it's one of the few games series that I will try to pick up close to the first day. Try to take some days off work. The whole thing. I'm a diehard Zelda fan. What was your first Zelda game that you started speedrunning, and what was appealing to you about that?
So almost just a couple months after I picked up Mega Man 1 for speedrunning in 2012, like we talked about. Probably in December of 2012, I learned any percent in Ocarina of Time. Learned is a strong word. I don't know if I ever finished a run, but I did learn it. Excuse me. And after that, I sort of ingratiated myself in the Ocarina of Time speedrunning community. And so I've been playing Ocarina of Time for 8 years. Not super seriously, usually more as like a fun thing. Yeah. Like I'll do 100% run once a year, probably. Oh, nice. With like no practice at all. Exactly. It takes me about 6 hours usually. Yeah, and I'll do bingos pretty frequently. Oh yeah. Because Ocarina of Time bingo is like my absolute favorite race type of any game. I think it is perfect, but that's a different story. And so for me, it was Ocarina of Time to start with, for sure.
I think it's one of the things important to note at that point. So Runner Guy was on the podcast, and there was a speedrunning scene in Ocarina of Time even 8 years ago. It wasn't what it is. Time ago, yeah. Not what it was today, but there were still people. There was a fair amount of people trying to break the game, the whole thing, trying to find new ways to do things. And I think that's one of the. I think that's because the game was so popular, that always helps out. But it's just so fun to try to play it in those ways. I've done the randomizer at this point, and there's so many different ways you can play through the game, even still to this day, and even back then. I think that's makes the game quite appealing to all different walks of life, not just speedrunning, not just one specific thing. So then, when did you decide then, or I guess better yet, let me take this a step back. Had you played any of the other Zelda games? Did that Ocarina of Time lead you on to try some, Twilight Princess, or any of these other Zelda games that were perhaps out at the time?
So I played almost every 3D Zelda game at launch, just like nice. You.
Cool. Cool.
Ocarina of Time came out the year I was born. So that one wasn't something I played at launch.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yes. But Wind Waker, we bought right away and I struggled with. And then Twilight Princess we bought my brother waited in line for the Wii on launch day. Oh, that's so cool. So we got, unit 200 something in our area or something. And we played Twilight Princess a bunch. And then I bought Skyward Sword on launch day. And I bought Breath of the Wild. I downloaded it launch night when it released on Wii U. And then I stayed up until like 4 a.m. playing it. And I had the whole thing the next day. But anyway, yeah, I love the Zeldas. I grew up on Link's Awakening. So again, another Game Boy game. But so yeah, all the Zelda games have been with me for my whole life.
I assume at this point, then you've played because you mentioned it, the Link's Awakening, I guess remake or remaster.
So I haven't.
Oh no! Wow.
I just bought a Switch like 6 months ago because the only reason I wanted a Switch was to play Breath of the Wild. But I bought Breath of the Wild on the Wii U.
Right, did you too?
But I wanted to play more Odyssey because I did speedrun that on a friend's console for a couple months, and I wanted to play the new Pokemon. So I have it. I just haven't bought the game yet.
So I recently played through it just a month or so ago, maybe it's 2 months. And the thing I really appreciate, the art style is really nice to look at. It's really fun, but they didn't change too much from the Game Boy version. And I think that highlights how good a game Link's Awakening was on the Game Boy, because they didn't change a ton of it, at least from my memory of it. And like yourself, Link's Awakening on the Game Boy, probably one of my favorite Zelda games. It's so good. And
I think you'd be hard pressed to tell me that there's a better handheld Zelda game.
Oh yeah, I as much as I love Seasons and Ages, like they're really great, but Awakening just does everything right so well, and it's never there's never a boring moment in the game, you know?
No. Even the first 2 minutes are so exciting. When you pick up the sword on the beach and that music plays, oh, that game rocks.
So good. Okay, so I had this experience. So Breath of the Wild has been a bit, for those of us who grew up with all of the Zelda games, Breath of the Wild can be this really big departure from how you typically experience a Zelda game. And I would say I was a bit hesitant, and it took me a few hours to get into the game. But the more I've played the game, and I still haven't 100%ed it, the more I enjoy this game, and the more I just want to keep playing it. I probably have, 70 or 80 hours into the game, and there's still things I haven't done. I'm curious, what was your experience with Breath of the Wild, your first time playing through it, and then what decided or led you to try speedrunning it?
So I saw the story trailer at E3 2016, or I think it was E3 2016. And I turned the lights off and I put my headphones on and I cranked it all the way up and I watched the trailer and I cried. And then
Perfect.
I said out loud to myself, I can die so long as I play this game first. And I really believed it. So I bought the game on launch, and my first playthrough was about 90 hours, and I had no desire to 100% it. Once I found out how many Koroks there were, I had no desire.
Yeah, I'm not going to plan on doing that either. It's silly, but I mean, there's a lot.
But it is a gorgeous game. It has its flaws,
sure,
but it has so many great things in it that it is impossible to not give it a 9 out of 10 or better. In my opinion, like on a 1 to 100 scale, I put it at maybe like a 94 or 95.
Wow.
It's just like it knows what it is so deeply, and you can feel the heart and soul of it. I remember the first time you leave the Shrine of Resurrection and you walk up the mountain and that panning shot plays. And I just remember chills all over my body. Like, oh my God, this is Hyrule? Do I get to do all of that? And then the Great Plateau was like an amazing beginning of the game. So smart. And, you know, I actually did not want to speedrun it for years because as a speedrunner, you'll know that sometimes when you learn to speedrun a game, you can never experience it casually again.
Right, yes.
You lose the ability to play it casually the same way. And obviously, your second playthrough is never going to be the same as your first anyway. But once you speedrun something, it's totally different. Your mindset for the game is different. And so I didn't for years. But in 2020, when I decided to do the 3D Zelda challenge, I had no choice. And then I fell in love with Breath of the Wild speedrunning from there.
And it's probably why I haven't ever attempted an Ocarina of Time speedrun, because of that. I play the game casually at least once or twice a year, just the original game played through. And it's one of those things where I want to leave it precious. But at the same time, all these things look so cool that these people are doing. It looks fun. I think you touched on something that is kind of tough to ignore in a game like Breath of the Wild, the beauty of it and how it looks. And for me, I don't know if anybody else had this experience, but I still enjoy just running up to the top of a mountain and, you know, looking over the vistas and looking at because once, you know, there's no loading on the overworld unless you fast travel or something. And it's just one of those things where it's like, if the game just makes you want to do that, I really feel like the game has sucked you in, and it's tough to ignore some of the aesthetics of it because that's a magical experience that still holds. It still is so fun for me. I still do it today. It's kind of wild that we've got so many hours into the game.
Yeah, the game really prioritizes exploration at its core,
right? And
it makes you want to explore. It's great.
I completely agree. And the hesitations I had over, you know, weapons that would break and that I'd have to, you know, after a few hours, it just becomes part of the game. And you realize it's not going to be Twilight Princess. It's not going to be Ocarina. It's not going to be some of these games I grew up with, but it is still amazing in its own right, to your point. 95, I'm right there with you. It's pretty darn good. What led you then to what led you to the speedrun? Because the speedrun just breaks the game 5 ways from Sunday on so many different categories. It's really fascinating.
So like I said, in early 2020, actually at AGDQ 2020, I was speaking with my friend Chaotic Ace, who is a really, really talented 3D Zelda speedrunner. He's held world records in Wind Waker, Twilight Princess, Breath of the Wild. And he and I are actually about the same age, so we have that in common. And we started around the same time as well. And I asked him if he wanted to learn the 3D Zelda challenge with me, because I had wanted to do it for a few years. And for those of you that don't know, the 3D Zelda challenge is a speedrunning challenge in which you do all of the 3D Zelda games any percent back to back in one massive speedrun. So it's kind of like a self-marathon run. And it had been done with Ocarina of Time through Skyward Sword, so 5 games, many times, I think 6 times by 2020. Yeah. But it hadn't been done for years, and it hadn't been done since Breath of the Wild came out. And so I was like, well, this is a free world record.
Typical speedrunner. Okay, fair.
Yeah, this is a free world record. All I have to do is learn 6 games. 6 really hard speedruns. And so in January, I learned Twilight Princess with Ace's help. And then in February, I learned Wind Waker. And then in March, I learned, and I learned Majora's Mask throughout. And then in March, I learned Skyward Sword. And then I grinded all the games until May. And then in May of 2020, I did my first 3D Zelda challenge attempt. And so Skyward Sword really was something, I think Breath of the Wild was the last one that I learned, actually.
Okay.
And so it was just a matter of circumstance. I knew I had to learn it. And so I did, and it wound up being really enjoyable. So
I would be showing the video here, except that it's 11 hours long. So, but first of all, just the fact that it takes you months to prep for that sounds fascinating. Did you have were there's any of the games more challenging than the other, or did they all kind of present a similar challenge, being that you hadn't speedran many of them?
They're all really different in their current any percent forms. Twilight Princess is the most like classic speedrun of them, I would say. Mm-hmm. It's long, really small optimizations with a few big glitches. The rest are kind of broken wide open. I mean, Breath of the Wild allows you to go straight to Ganon, so there, you could do it glitchless in under 40 minutes probably. Right. But I mean, Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask in their current forms are so different. You have to do, SRM, which is this heavy glitch in order to beat the game in like 5 seconds. Not literally, obviously, but Wind Waker is the hardest speedrun I have ever played. No game has ever been that challenging to just be okay at. Any percent in Wind Waker in its current form is unbelievable. I do a slightly easier route than the world record, and it is still unbelievably hard. It is not just execution difficult, it is physically demanding. Like, super swims require really acute physical input, and zombie hovers are the single most straining trick in any game I've ever played.
So I was watching Linkus in the practice room, one of the GDQs back then, and just seeing what his hands were actually doing, it kind of blew my mind, because you can see it on his webcam and everything, but to see it in person and actually how fast I can't even describe the motion of it. It's like his hands are rocking. Yeah, please. Because it's so fascinating.
This is something I'm kind of passionate about.
Yeah, please.
Is mashing technique. So for any of you budding speedrunners out there are a lot of different ways you can mash a controller. If you're mashing a button, if you're doing something else, I can't help you. But if you're mashing a button, the classic is just like, like press your thumb down as fast as you can. And like, that's good. And then, maybe you evolve to like pinching your fingers together and going like this. Right. And like that flexing your forearm. And that's definitely a good way. But with tricks where you don't need to touch the analog stick, like zombie hovering, there's the double mash. Now, the double mash is a beautiful thing. And so you are now no longer, should you think of yourself as moving your fingers to the controller, think of the controller moving to your fingers. This Chaotic Ace, the aforementioned runner, taught me this. He was kind of the person that brought double mashing to Wind Waker years ago. So you have to mash the B button for zombie hovering like at least 13 times a second. And so there are people that can just do this for that. Narciso was one of them. But for double mashing, you place your 2 thumbs hovering just above the B button, and you move the controller back and forth into your thumbs like that.
That's it. So that's the motion.
You can mash really, really quickly and for a long period of time without hurting yourself too much. It is still very painful, and I highly recommend active stretchings just stretch your hands and your wrists as often as you can.
You could hear the clicks. I mean, that's so wild. I mean, that's exactly what I was talking about. And it's such an interesting technique, but I got to imagine that could take a toll on the hands pretty quickly.
Oh yeah, absolutely. There's a reason I don't speedrun Wind Waker that often.
Well, that's really fascinating, and it's awesome that that's where these games have been grinded down to, that we have to talk about mashing technique and all of these things, because Wind Waker is still one of my, it's one of the runs I probably watch way more than I probably should watch things, but it's fascinating in that sense, is that there's these crazy glitches happening. Yes, got it. But at the same time, there is a real technique to what is happening as well. You have to learn these things to do the game to do the speed run properly. It's pretty awesome. And was it fun learning something like that? Like all new ways to do things?
I am very proud of even having finished an 80% run, let alone under 2 hours. It's wild. Super swimming is so much harder than you can even believe. Like, when I saw it, I was like, it looks really cool and fast, but it can't be that hard. There is so much nuance in super swimming, like just in changing angles, there is so much nuance. And every time you charge a super swim, it's different. You are actively adapting every single time you charge a super swim. No two super swims are ever the same. It's really cool.
Okay, so you just touched on something that has me, as a mostly 2D speedrunner, has caused hesitation to try a 3D speedrun. You talked about the angles and the camera, what you're getting at is like where your camera's positioned, how you're positioned in relation to 3D space and all that kind of stuff. And as somebody who came from Mega Man, did you find it natural to just start doing those things, or did it take some work? Can you walk through that process a little bit about how you were able to learn to do some of that stuff?
Ocarina of Time is a 2D game in 3D clothing. Because like the camera is so easy to control in Ocarina of Time, and you can do precise motions the same every single time with like C up or ESS positions. Right. So Ocarina of Time was relatively easy to transition to in 2012, 2013. Super Mario Sunshine was the first 3D game I really tried to speedrun that is like all about minute movement and camera control, and I was horrible. I was like truly awful. And I remember getting so mad all the time because I felt like I wasn't as good as I could be. And I would say it took years before I could pick up a 3D speedrun and really be proficient. And I'll chalk some of that up to my age. When I was a lot younger, it was very difficult for me to be patient enough to learn longer, harder runs. I would get frustrated or I would feel, I wouldn't have enough time or whatever because it's bad at time management.
You mean like any teenager? Okay. No,
yeah, exactly.
Sorry.
No. But these days, I'm in my mid-20s. I feel like I understand what it takes to run a 3D game a lot more now. A lot of that is just experience. Right. Like I've run a lot of 3D games by this point, and now I feel a lot more comfortable with that. It just took time.
That's one of the things that it seems to be a through line for everyone, is the more time you spend with the game, the more experience you get, but you also learn how different games react to what you do to the game. And I think that's a really important point. That's one of the things speedrunners, we're not always the most talented people at these games, but we're willing to put in the time that it takes and all of the failures that come with that to learn how to do these things. I think that's such a really important point. How many attempts have you done at the 3D challenge?
Two.
2?
So I've done 2. I did one in May of 2020, and then I did one in August of 2020. So I set the world record in May, and then in August I improved it by like an hour and a half or so. Which was not my goal. My goal was to improve it by like 2 or 3 hours. And Wind Waker completely obliterated me. And I do it 4th. You can do the games in any order. Cool. And I do it 4th because at the beginning of Wind Waker, there's a 4-minute cutscene where you don't have to do any inputs.
Oh, nice. Good break.
So I use that as a break.
Yeah.
And there's a trick at the very end of Wind Waker 80% called Morth Hover. And it stumped me for over an hour. It's just really, really hard, and I was nervous, and you get yourself in a rut in speedrunning sometimes. Right. And I can't reset because I'm 6 hours into the challenge.
Yeah, that's kind of a problem.
7 hours into the challenge, and I hit this mental roadblock, and I lost like 2 hours on one trick.
Oh no.
but I'm coming back to it. I'm doing another 3D challenge probably in like 3 weeks.
Oh, wow.
And so I'm gonna. I can't get the world record now. Demon went to the category, and Demon has held world record in almost every 3D Zelda game, so I didn't stand a chance.
Oh no!
But I can say I improved the record once.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
when you return to it like you're about to, are you having to? Obviously, you're about to kind of spend the months that you had learning the games. Do you have to still prep to do the run again?
Yeah, I would say, and I've said this on stream a few times, but I think that my biggest trait in speedrunning, like my best quality, is that I de-rust really quickly. I can usually do one run, and then I'm kind of back in fighting form.
Oh, nice.
I need to practice, obviously, to do the harder things, but as far as like the minutia, one run will pretty much get me back in shape. And so I've been doing that. I did practice and a few attempts for Wind Waker, so I'm kind of back in that. Twilight Princess I also did last week, so I'm back in that. I'm learning a new route for Ocarina of Time next week, and I'm learning a new route for Majora's Mask. That's going to take the most amount of time, but I've been playing Breath of the Wild nonstop for 6 months, so I don't need to de-rust that. And so I feel pretty good. My goal is under 11 hours, but under 10 hours would make me very happy.
I think
so we'll see.
The sub 10. What
Yes.
did, if you don't mind asking, I didn't see, I don't know if is there a leaderboard for it? Because I wasn't, what's the current
there
world
is.
record? Oh, there is. Cool. Okay.
It's kind of hard to find. It's multiple Zelda games, I think, or something like that on speedrun.com.
Got it.
So I have an 11:20-ish. And Demon's first run was like 9 hours and change. And then now he has sub 7. So it's a little bit faster.
Dang.
The biggest time save is that my Twilight Princess PB is much slower than theirs. I'm over an hour slower than, like, on average, than the world record. And they do a faster Skyward Sword route and a faster Wind Waker route. And that's the bulk of the time.
You mentioned that you've been grinding Breath of the Wild these past 6 months, and I've definitely been watching those when they've been happening on stream. The 90% stuff has been really fun. It's an interesting cat, and a lot of just doing a bunch of really cool tricks. they look fun. But recently, I've noticed that you started doing a randomizer, and I'm curious.
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't familiar. Would you mind telling me a little bit about how the randomizer works for Breath of the Wild? Like what console? How do you play it?
Sure. So currently, there is no traditional randomizer for Breath of the Wild.
Got it. Okay.
Modding Breath of the Wild is classically quite difficult, or categorically quite difficult. Mm-hmm. And I don't want to play on emulator anyway.
Right.
And I don't want to hack my console. And so people have come up with their own ways to randomize the game. There's like a more traditional randomizer that accompanies the game where like it tells you where you should go. Like get this Korok seed and then you can unlock the next thing to do. Or there's shrine randomizers where it tells you in a random order to do the shrines. Mm-hmm. My randomizer is a challenge run randomizer, and it's something I made.
Cool.
And it, again, accompanies the game. So it's something that you play alongside.
Yeah.
And I love challenge runs where you like impose restrictions on yourself. And so after I did a few challenge runs in Breath of the Wild, I coalesced some of that knowledge into this randomizer. And it randomizes armor to wear, the only weapons you can use, the only bows you can use, the only shields you can use, and it gives you goals to complete. So it's sort of like a bingo meets a restriction race. It's like those two things combined and then randomized.
I completely agree. I've been loving challenges over the past year or two. And the bingo thing, when Runner Guy was talking about it, I started trying it myself, and it's really fun. So that's what I thought you were doing, but I should have asked when I was watching you play it recently, because like that's what it looked like, but I wasn't quite sure. And I think it's, once again, just gives you another reason to play the game in a way that you haven't played it before, which I think is really cool. One of the things I have seen too, and I know that you mentioned emulation, and just to touch on it real quick, who was I watching? Somebody was playing an emulated, I think it was the crowd control folks, because it was running at 60 frames a second. And I'm like, what is going on here? Like, it looked wonderful if you have a beefy PC and everything, but it's not the same experience. I mean, the input lag, that's why I've struggled to play out. Once you've not had input lag, when you go back to it, it can be like, a real challenge. But it does seem like there is people trying, like, I mean, isn't there even a modding scene, if I remember correctly? People who have started, there's things going on in the game.
It's a little budding. It's not fully fledged yet, I don't think. I don't know a lot about it. So, I'm not going to say things I don't understand.
No, for sure.
But there are people that have been modding the game for a few years now. And yeah, the crowd control has been implemented into the game, I believe, on Cemu, which is the Switch and 3DS emulator. Or I think Citra. One of those is correct.
Okay. Well, okay, so you've mentioned a couple times that you're a student or you have been a student. And I've noticed with all of the things that you do, if you're not streaming full-time, you must be a full-time content creator because at least you're putting in those hours between what we'll get to, you get the GDQ show, some of the other things that you do. What are you going to, because you've talked about it on stream, like what are you going to school for? And how have you been able to balance some of these things that have happened, speed writing and doing all this other stuff?
So I went to my undergrad for physics. And I actually just finished my physics degree like 4 weeks ago.
Oh, congrats,
5 weeks ago.
Man.
Thanks. So I did my undergrad in 3.5 years, and I'm doing my master's in 1 year. So I layered. It's like a program that's supposed to be 4+1, but I came in with a lot of credits out of high school, and I managed my time well, and so I'm doing it as 3+1 instead of 4+1.
Wow.
So I'm a master's student right now and have been for 2 semesters, but I finished my last undergrad class last semester.
Oh, cool.
So I'm doing my last semester starting here in a couple weeks. So I am a full-time student, but I don't know. I think, for the first 2 years of my degree, 2.5 years, until I grinded for the 18 in Mega Man, I was streaming like once a week or once every 2 or 3 weeks because I was focusing on school and, enjoying the experience.
Exactly.
But when I started taking streaming more seriously around the 18 and then after AGDQ 2019 is when I really started taking streaming seriously, or AGDQ 2020, something like that.
Yeah.
Regardless, AGDQ 2020 is when I really started taking streaming seriously. And it really is just about time management. Like, it's a tough lesson to learn, and I don't know how to tell you how to do it. If you're, if you're someone listening and you're like, how are you juggling things? I get this question a lot, and like, I don't want to sound like an ass, to use a mean word, but
okay.
I don't know. I just manage time really, really well. I'm very grateful that I'm able to do that. Like, I can take on a lot of hobbies at once. Right now, it's really just streaming and content creation and school. Those are like my two. It's my job. I've converted it into my job. And so those are the two things that I work on the most actively.
I don't think it's cliche to say it as well, because I went back for my master's last year and learning how to just the same schedule that you might approach a full-time job. There's no wrong, even if you're like me, streaming to, 15 people or whatever, you can still approach it with the same structure and scheduling,
of course,
and find the time for it. If it's something that you enjoy doing and it's something you want to pursue, you manage to find time for it. And I think that's it's not cliche. I think it's a really good point to bring it up. And I'm glad you can do it if you're an undergrad or if you want to do school or if you want to do something like that. There's nothing's holding you back from managing your time that way,
No.
Okay, awesome. Let's see. So let's change gears here a little bit.
Sure.
And we'll get to Speedrunners and Dragons in just a second. But I'm curious if you grew up with board games or if you grew up with D&D. Like, what's your kind of history with D&D and how you got into that before we get into, and maybe that'll lead us into Speedrunners and Dragons.
Sure. So my older brother, who has been someone that, I've always looked up to and is, the older brother, I want to do what he's doing.
Yep.
I want,
Stay with me.
And he got me into video games and Pokemon and Zelda and all that. And he's always loved tabletop gaming, mostly more in the realm of like Catan and games of that nature, like more strategy type games. And so, I've played Axis and Allies, Stratego, Diplomacy, all the classics of like tabletop gaming before I even stepped foot into Dungeons and Dragons. And then years and years and years ago, there's a YouTube channel called Node, and they did a Dungeons and Dragons campaign in their infancy, maybe 2013 or 2014. And I was like, what is this? What is this? I've heard of this, but I've never seen this. And then it was on Community, which is, in my opinion, the best comedic television show ever written. But that's neither here nor there.
Gotta watch it. It's one of those ones I need to get to, and I haven't done it yet.
It is an amazing show.
Okay.
You really only need the first 3 seasons. Like, the first 3 seasons are truly masterful, but you should watch the whole thing.
Okay, I'm on it.
But they did Dungeons and Dragons in one of their episodes, and I sort of was like, I got to do this. And so, I did what anyone does when they're in high school and they want to do D&D. I got together my friends, and I was like, I'll write the thing, I'll buy the stuff, like just be here at this time. And they were like, okay. And then I fell in love with it, and I wanted to do it all the time, and I got burnt out, and then I came back. And, it was just a thing I was doing for my friends and family, and I really only ever did one-shots, which is where you just do one-sitting adventures. And I would just improvise them. I would have like a small outline in my head, and then I would just improvise the whole thing. And that was also one of my first forays into like true long-form improvisation, which is something I now do all the time. And I loved it, and I would do it for anyone that was willing to do it. And like, we would be, my siblings would be home for Christmas or something from college and their various jobs across the country. And I'd be like, I'll do a one-shot if you want. And they're like, okay.
Let's play.
Exactly. So we do that. And then, Speedrunners and Dragons there are lots of people making Dungeons and Dragons content on the internet.
Yeah.
It is not an original thing. It's what got me into the game. It's all over the place. But there was not something like that in speedrunning. Speedrunning had a lot of people collaborating, but only on like long form races and long form, let's play a bunch of games. And I was like, well, this is a skill set that I have, and I have wanted to make a proper D&D show for a while. And I think I'm finally at a place where I feel comfortable enough in my skills as a writer and as a performer, and having a Twitch audience that I can finally do this for, because that's a thing too, right? Like, I knew I wanted to ask people that were relatively large streamers, especially compared to myself, and that meant it needed to be worth it for them,
right?
And so I wanted the show to be good, high quality, and to a reasonably sized audience for it to be worth their while. And in the summer of this year, I started sort of collecting pieces, little by little, talking to people, and it took a while to get the team of 4 that I have now. But I'm so grateful for the 4 people that I picked up, and the show is having its 11th episode in like 10 days. So
I've got a few questions about it. There is something you touched upon, though, that I think is important to at least understanding some of the foundation. And I noticed I found this out about I should have obviously guessed this by watching the show, but on your Twitter bio, you mentioned that you're an actor. I worked in entertainment for a few years. I was,
oh, really?
I ended up producing my own independent film. I love that world and that thing. And my life took me in a different direction. Thankfully, I love what I do nowadays, but it was a real, there are so many valuable skills you learn about just communicating and like having relationships with people through acting and theater games and improv and all this great stuff. And it's obvious you have, so at least you've worked on it. I don't know what kind of training you've had, but it's obviously you've worked on it, because that's one of the great, I think it's one of the wonderful things about D&D is that if you are into that type of performance, D&D is a really great, avenue for that. And so when did you get that bug for like improv and acting and that kind of thing?
Sure. So, like anyone else who grew up in the Midwest, I was in my first school musical when I was in like 7th or 8th grade, and I hated it. And then in high school, I didn't act my freshman year because they were doing Grease, and I hate Grease.
Oh, that's so stereotypical.
And then my sophomore year, a friend of mine convinced me to audition for the musical, and I did it, and I got the lead, and I was in this show, and it was my first foray into like semi-professional theater. It was not professional by any means,
sure,
but the director was a professional director who came to work at our school as a theater teacher. She had kids, and she decided to like settle down, and she became my mentor. And for 3 years, I worked really closely with her, because, I sort of confided in her, and she was like, this is something you could pursue if you wanted to. And I was like, I don't know. I don't think I would ever do that. But I did love it, and I wanted to get better. And so she and I worked really closely for 3 years. And then by the time I left high school, I was a much better actor. And then I went to college in New York City. And so I was like, I decided to be a physicist, because, all these people in my life, when I was doing theater in high school, I realize this has nothing to do with speedrunning, but we're here now.
It's great. I love it.
when I was in high school, all these theater mentors were like, you should really go into acting. And I was like, that's not a viable career. I won't make any money and I'll be miserable.
Right.
And so I decided to go into science, which is my first love. I really love science. And so I went into physics, and I do love it. I wouldn't have finished all 4 years of my degree if I didn't want to do it. But I tried. It was sort of a similar thing. I saw a flyer for auditions my freshman year, and I went and auditioned, and it was like true semi-professional theater. We had a budget through the student organization, and we hired professional directors from New York City to direct our shows. And I made tons of great connections. And then by the time I was a junior, I was acting and stuff in the city. And I was doing actual professional theater work.
Yeah.
And
back
COVID,
when theater was happening. Yeah.
Yeah. COVID, unfortunately, really, I was in actually a pretty sizable show that we were rehearsing for months. And then COVID just completely ruined it, which is upsetting, of course. But, what can you do? And it was around the same... What was that?
Finish. Go ahead.
It was around the same time that I found the comedy club on campus, and it was just some of my friends were in it. And one of the older guys there sort of taught me a lot about improv. And it was something that I was already kind of doing whenever I would do D&D stuff or act, but I never knew the actual skills. Like, it's one thing to have a bug for improv. It's another thing to learn the actual skills that like get you there. And so he and I then had never taken formal training. And so when he graduated, he and I decided to train at UCB, which is the Upright Citizens Brigade Theater in New York City.
Yeah.
And so we trained there for a few years. Unfortunately, they closed down in COVID, so I couldn't finish the last class. No. But it's all good. And I have all this experience in improv and acting that I was always shy to show on my stream. Like, I was always very nervous to show off those skills or whatever.
Yeah.
But I feel more confident now, and it's been a really fun thing to bring to Speedrunners and Dragons and to my stream. But like, acting is what I want to pursue professionally, and so why not?
It's probably not too much of a stretch to put these whole things together. But thank you for taking us down that road, because there are a few others who've been on the podcast who have talked about this, where like streaming works really, it's like this natural, it's not performing on a stage, but there's a performance aspect to streaming. Spike has talked about it, Prosentia, where like they really enjoy like, taking on some of that creative role and that creative performance.
Spike is a classically trained actor.
Right? Exactly. So, and he talked about this when we were talking about it. It's like, that's so cool that you find a different, this is still the same performance. It's just we have a different modality than a camera or than an audience in a theater or something, and thankfully, as much as my heart has been breaking with all my friends during COVID who are artists and freelancers, and they don't have a job right now and all those kind of things. But a lot of them I shouldn't say a lot of them. Some of them are finding Twitch now. So it's as normal people, we got to put food on the table. So you find whatever the next thing is. But I think it lends itself well, especially to bringing it back to the D&D, where it's like you get a chance to really, this is a creative thing that at times you got to think up on the spot. I know you write out a script and you do the whole thing, but like there are other times where you need to be spontaneous and you got to come up with this improv stuff. And that's one of the one things it's so much fun to watch because it happens right in front of you. You're seeing it on screen.
Exactly.
Who's the current lineup with Speedrunners and Dragons right now?
Sure. So the Blacktastic is one of our players. Danny B is one of our players. He's an Ocarina of Time speedrunner. And Bobby, obviously, through GDQ Hotfix. And then Patty is one of our players. Again, I mentioned before, he and I have known each other for years. And so, he doesn't define himself as a speedrunner currently, but he did come up in Twitch through speedrunning. And so we sort of snagged him in that aspect.
Yeah.
And Dangers, whom you had on the show recently, he is our fourth. So,
it's one of those things where I shouldn't be surprised by this, but when you visit a GDQ practice room, a game room, when there's actually, GDQ live, you'll see a D&D game or there'll be many tabletop games happening. And I'm curious, is there something you think that, I guess maybe just we like breaking things. We like playing games like this, but what's the connection between like speedrunning and D&D or speedrunning and tabletop gaming?
I think it's just nerd culture. I don't know. I hate to use that word, but no, it's true. So true. Like, people who like to play video games full time probably also like D&D. It's just like a Venn diagram that is non-zero.
Oh, that's a really good. Sometimes we're just geeks, It's all right. Yeah.
We're just those kids in the back of the cafeteria, and we just want to play video games.
Ah, so true. Let's shift gears here just a little bit. What exactly is Challenger approaching? And I'll GDQ Hotfix show. But tell us, what's the premise for the show? What's it all about?
Sure, and apologies if you're hearing the garage open under me. It's just below me, and apparently somebody's having a field day opening and closing it.
Can't hear it at all. You're good.
Discord's great.
It's doing a good job.
Challenger Approaching is a show that I run on GDQ Hotfix, and Lat and I started around the same time, actually.
Yeah.
It is about players showing off challenge runs, and so we sort of touched on this a little bit earlier, but I love challenge runs. And so it's an opportunity for me to show off some really great challenge runs and challenge runners.
It's I'm not sure how many you've done at this point, but it's really I think it gives people an idea of how to try a game for yourself. Especially, I don't know if you still have this, but people still come into the stream and they're hesitant about attempting to speedrun. Oh, I could never do that. I could never do that. Well, why not start with this? It's actually one of the reasons I started. I found Twitch was for some challenge runs. Somebody was doing a 3-heart challenge of Majora's Mask. I'm like, this is so incredible. How are they actually doing this? And what are some of the ones you've had on? And there's been some really interesting ones.
So we just did our 3rd episode on Friday night, 2 nights ago. And I don't know when this is getting uploaded, so I guess I should say it was Friday, January 15th.
There you go, sometime in January.
Yeah. So our first episode was 360 Chrism doing Pokemon Crystal No EXP Randomizer. And then our second episode was Danny B, who I mentioned earlier for Speedrunners and Dragons, showing off Ocarina of Time glitchless low percent. And then our third episode on Friday night was Reed, showing off Paper Mario The Thousand Year Door pre-Hooktail Pit of 100 Trials. So we've had some pretty gnarly stuff on and some very difficult attempts at various things, but it's been a blast so far.
Is there a challenge run that you've taken on yourself that perhaps is one of the ones that you think back fondly of or really enjoyed more so than maybe some others?
So I tried pre-Hooktail Pit myself. It was very hard. The hardest thing I've done in Breath of the Wild was beat the game with only Bokoblin weapons. Only Bokoblin weapons and only Bokoblin bows and no clothing. That was very, 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 very hard. But I did do it.
Did you beat all the beasts before you actually went and beat the game, or did? So
my initial idea was to just go straight to Ganon with as much stuff as I could, and I got absolutely obliterated, mostly by Thunderblight. And so my new plan was to do all the Divine Beasts I could do, because with this restriction of no clothing, you can't do Vonaboris because you can't wear the Gerudo clothes, and you can't do Varuda because you can't wear the Zora armor. And so I did Va Meadow, which is the easiest one to do with no clothing. So that was helpful. It gave me another heart, and it gave me some, Rivali's Gale, which I guess could be useful, but it also removes one of the fights from the Blights. The Inner Sanctum, which is great. But then it still was impossible. And so I just needed, for my weapon durability, I needed to get rid of at least one more of the Blights. So the only one you can do is Fire Blight, but that meant I had to do Eldin with no fireproof armor. And so I had to make double level fireproof elixirs, and several of them, and then only use wooden weapons in the volcano. So I had to switch off my weapons every 5 seconds. But it was really fun. I finished that. But my favorite challenge runs I've done are Pokemon No EXP challenges. Are so fun. They're really just they're puzzles. They're really, really fun puzzles to try to figure out.
So as I mentioned, I'm new to the game. How does a no EXP run work? Because how do you catch up? I mean, I guess you could catch, but how does that work?
So you use hacks to turn off experience gain. Okay. And then after that, you basically just catch new Pokemon every route. You just have to keep catching new stuff. It's really, really hard. and you have to have like a pretty good understanding of the game that you're playing to know what's coming. And, you know, you use online resources like Pokemon Database or Cerebi.net to be like, okay, what does this gym leader have? What are they going to use? And it makes like even Brock and Misty, which are the first 2 gym leaders in Pokemon, you know, Red or Fire Red, really hard. Because you can't catch anything good until later in the game.
Well, that's one of the things that got recommended to me very early on was, you know, use a guide, not a guide, one of the charts, you know, have some resources available to you while you're playing through a Pokemon game. And I didn't quite understand what all that meant. It's taken me about 15 or 20 hours to start to understand exactly everything. I know that seems kind of like a long time, but I don't always remember things very well. So like it's helpful to have those guides up, and it's not cheating to know, because especially in some of the Game Boy versions, I felt maybe it was the limited graphics, but it was sometimes a bit obtuse. Oh, that's a rock type. Or until they had started attacking me, I didn't know that was that type of Pokemon and things like that. But the resources out there can be super helpful. And once again, creating a new way and different way to play through the game.
It's interesting that you say that because, you know, as someone who my first game was Pokemon, it's very intuitive for me now, but I can only imagine what it was like for me when I was first starting out. I had no idea what anything was. I didn't even know you could save. And so that's not really a function of age.
Right.
I think it's really just a function of like, it has a learning curve, especially in those early generations. If you start with Sword and Shield, I mean, the game is going to hold your hand all the way through.
Right.
But with the earlier games, which I think are the better games, there's not a lot of hand holding. And so I totally understand it being confusing. In fact, one of my roommates this past year, he started playing Pokemon and he was loving it, but it's the first time he ever played, and he was like really struggling. And he was like, Clay, what do I do? Like, I don't, you know, I'm stuck on this. I'm stuck in Viridian Forest or something, which is like one of the first areas. And I was like, what are you stuck on? And he was like, well, I'm using this type. And I was like, don't you know there are super effective moves? And he was like, what? I thought that was random. And I was like, no, you got to use fire on grass type. Or like water on fire type. He's like, oh, I thought that was random. And I was like, no, that's an intended mechanic.
I did not grasp that at all the first couple hours. And I think part of it too is that I bring 30 something years of history. You know, I'm a Final Fantasy. RPGs are probably my favorite genre of games. And I'm used to having, you know, 3 people in my party or whatever. And I'm giving them commands during battle. And there's all this intricate stuff. And in a sense, Pokemon seem like a step back from that. So intellectually, I'm like, oh man, Pokemon's a really cool way to get. If you've never played RPGs, Pokemon's a great place to start. It's a little bit simpler as far as that thing goes, but there are all these things that happen because of that, the way that they programmed it that way, that make it fascinating. But it didn't click because of, you know, I bring 14 Final Fantasies of experience with me. I bring, you know, these Chrono Trigger, you know, all these wonderful RPGs that this is not that. These are something different. And I think that's also probably now that I'm 20 hours in, I'm enjoying it way more because at least I figured out how to save, I guess, on the my first playthrough. But, you know, it's really a great game. I've been enjoying it quite a bit. And I'm glad I'm going with the Game Boy ones and the Game Boy Color ones. I'm probably going to stick there a little while, maybe in advance, because they are really great fun, to say the least. For you, what next? Any games you want to play? Any things you want to continue doing, content creation wise? What's next for you?
Speedrunners and Dragons Campaign 2 will happen at some point this year. I'm thinking late spring, maybe. Some returning faces, some new faces. It's going to be bigger. It's going to be better. It's going to be flashier. I'm excited for that. 3D Zelda challenge I'm attempting in a couple of weeks.
Heck yeah.
Other than that, you know, I've been on this partner push for so long that I'm not sure what I'll do when it's over. There's lots of stuff I want to do, and you know, sort of my passion in speedrunning is ever evolving and changing, and you know, as I age, it's becoming different, and so you know, who knows what's next? But there will be Zelda. That much I can tell you.
I'm a little bit bummed that I only found your stream recently. I wish I would have tuned in a little bit earlier because, first of all, it was a bit surprising that I'm like, you're not partner? Look at the numbers here. Okay, anybody. But I'm sure it'll happen.
Me too.
Yeah, okay.
me too. I'm also surprised by that.
Not to be that guy or anything, but I am glad that I found it because there's always something interesting when I've tuned into your streams, and it's you keep a good variety going on. I really enjoy the games that you play and the things that you're doing. Speedrunners and Dragons just really caught my eye as being something that's super fun to watch, and you're uploading them to YouTube. I mean, it's just a really well produced show, and if you're at all interested in all this kind of stuff, there's really the guests are great. Everything about it is just really fun and enjoyable to watch. It's a good watch, and I'm excited that you're going to keep it going and keep doing it because I'm sure it has to take a lot of work to get the thing going, though.
Recently I realized after looking at all the documents that in lore documents and monster pages and like actual episode scripts, I've written over 100 pages for the first campaign.
Wow.
And so, I mean, some of that I press enter a lot of times.
Sure.
So like I would say a conservative estimate is I've probably written like 70 full pages of things for this show. I really love it and I'm very passionate about it. And I'm going to take a break after campaign 1 ends, which we're going to have 2 episodes left. There's only 2 more. And then after that, I'm going to take a break, start fresh, and make it bigger and better.
I don't know if physics is like this, but in my grad program, I'm getting a master's in education, and it's a ton of writing when you're going through a grad program. So I assume you're doing a ton of writing for school and also...
Nope.
No,
not
okay.
In physics.
Oh,
not
cool.
in physics, baby. I don't have to write almost anything.
God, okay, thankfully.
Yeah, I'm just doing a buttload of math.
Oh man, okay, well that's fair. That's fair. That's a trade-off. Trade the writing for math. Fair enough.
Yeah.
Well, adef, thank you so much for taking the time and walking us through a lot of this. It's been a great amount of fun, and I look forward to, actually getting the chance to meet you in person at some point if we ever get a chance to do that.
Absolutely.
Where can people find you on Twitch if they want to find all your stuff?
Twitch.tv/adef. ADEF.
Anything else? Twitter? Where they can find you there?
The other thing I'll plug is Speedrunners and Dragons, I think.
Oh, please, okay.
YouTube.com/Speedrunners Dragons. One word. Speedrunners Dragons, one word. You can also just search on YouTube Speedrunners and Dragons. Nothing else is going to come up, I promise.
That's what I did, and it was, that was the first hit, so.
And subscribe, and start at episode 1. I promise you won't regret it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. And best of luck with everything that's going on, man.
Thank you. You too, Lat.
Thanks, everyone, for listening and watching. If you're enjoying the podcast, subscribe, leave a review. All those things go a long way to helping out the podcast. If you'd like to continue the conversation, I'm on Twitter @LatMackey, or you can also join the LatMackey Discord, where we have a sequence break channel. We talk about guests. We have questions. It's really interactive, really fun. Please feel free to stop on by. Thanks so much. See you in the next one.